The dramatic countdown. Welcome back inside the studio here in Parts Unknown. I'm Matt Gajtka. This is your Penguins rapid reaction after a 3-2 overtime loss to Detroit on home ice, a game in which the Penguins were rather somnambulant. Use your dictionary on that one to start the game. And, warmed to the task in a big way. Got a couple of goals in the second period to erase a 2-0 deficit and played a really airtight third period, I thought, and couldn't get that third goal past the journeyman netminder Cam Talbot. And Talbot, in fact, stones Yevgeny Malkin on his big, pregame ceremony night. The night sent to honor him after the 500th goal that he scored a couple of weeks ago. But no storybook ending this time for Malkin and the Penguins in overtime as they lose their first overtime game of the season. Simon Edvinsson, the big D-man, makes a nice move, and Alex Nedeljkovic couldn't adjust. Brian Rust sprawled on the ice, and hey, it's overtime. Weird things happen. I don't like to overanalyze overtime, or especially not shootout results. So thank goodness it wasn't a shootout, because I hate having to try to act like, oh, there's some great meaning in this one. In this game, the meaning is that they played the Wings to a stalemate in a game that I'm sure that they were, I guess, hoping to win here at home, even after their putrid performance against the Dallas Stars. Of course, they hope to win every game, but maybe expectation is a little bit of a dirty word with the Penguins these days, because I don't think they should expect to beat anyone short of perhaps the San Jose Sharks, and maybe even that's a stretch. And we'll get to see the Sharks a little bit later this week at home, but that's neither here nor there as the Penguins get a point. But as I said on X before the start of the third period, feels like a big period coming up, but the Penguins need a lot more than a big period if they do want to make something of this season. So they remain stagnant in the Eastern Conference standings. They're now 6-9-3, and that's the kind of point you don't want to give away to a team that you are ostensibly battling for playoff positioning. And it's really early in the season, and I know many of you have already given up hope on this team, but I'm still functioning as if this is a viable season, even though there might be a stealth rebuild going on. Lars Eller, of course, traded last night. So, and we're hearing reports, Elliot Friedman, most notable among them from up in Canada on Sportsnet, that Kyle Dubas is looking to make some bigger moves. And that would indicate that we are not nearly done with the player transactions this season. The Pens, I don't know what exactly they're trying to do. It's hard to read the tea leaves, but at the same time, it's easy to say that they are desperate for points very early on this season. You can leave your comment, leave your question, leave your complaint. We might have a little bit of all three. It was actually a quite lively show on Monday, as the Dallas game, I think, scratched open a couple of old scabs and, threw some salt in very many wounds. And I think it was healthy, get a lot of things off our chest about the direction of this team. This game was, there wasn't a lot to it early on. I felt like both teams were kind of trying to feel their way out. The Wings had the early edge as they were trying to break a 3-game losing streak, and they eventually did. But at the same time, if I'm the Wings, I'm not feeling too great about this game either. It's one of those games, I think, where both teams are probably feeling a bit unsatisfied. Yes, the Wings get the 2 points, so that's going to feel good for them, but they probably feel like they should beat the Penguins, right? The old decrepit team, or so-called aging Penguins, they've aged out of their contention cycle. I think that's probably without dispute at this point. And the Wings feel like they're on the rise, but they've been, quote, on the rise for about, 6, 7, 8 years. And what have they gained? A few points in the standings since Steve Yzerman took over the GM's role. So the Wings are a bit stagnant. The Penguins are stagnant. I don't know who should feel a little bit worse about how the game played out, because the Wings actually blew a 2-0 lead, as I mentioned at the top of the show. So, oh boy, it's really fun, isn't it, trying to figure out who should feel worse about this one. I still think it's the Penguins in the end because of what they were coming off of on Monday, and just the fact that it took them a while to get into this game. I don't really understand that. And I keep vacillating between, is this team just not good enough to make a run, or is this team just refusing to put the effort in to play the way they need to make a run? And I keep leaning toward the far side of that, toward the second part of that dichotomy there. I think that they just can't muster up 82 games of urgency anymore. And that's an understandable thing for a team that is as aged as the Penguins are, and who, well, at least some of the core has seen a lot of stuff. And these are the team leaders. And these are the guys that are supposed to pace the way. You can't be expecting an Anthony Beauvillier, for instance, who scored a goal, could have had another one tonight in the third period. You can't expect him to be the inspirational leader. So it's just the Penguins are stuck in a place right now where they're leaning on certain players, Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Carlson to a lesser degree, maybe a Brian Rust as well. I throw him into that mix. And they're leaning on these guys to raise the tempo. And I think in a lot of cases they are willing and able to do it, but not in all cases. And they're just not good enough to overcome games like tonight where they kind of flatline for at least 12, 14 minutes, I would say. You look at the shot totals, you look at some of the scoring chance numbers, and yeah, the Penguins were the better team overall tonight, but they're not quite as talented as they used to be, and they're not as relentless as they used to be as well. So you can't expect just 2 periods to be enough against a team that's basically your equal. Let's be honest. Folks are maybe a little bit upset about losing to the Wings, but the Pens and the Wings are basically in the same spot in the Eastern Conference, and the Pens have actually fallen a little bit behind with that defeat just because they have played more games, even though the Pens are level in points with Detroit on 15. Let's see what we got for you as far as comments go. We've got a few, not as many as the Dallas game. Christopher Weir asks, I'll send this to you as I did to Dan. Dan Kingerski, by the way, will have coverage, is providing coverage right now. The work is afoot at PPG Paints Arena for him. How does Rutger not make this roster? Kid came with a rep of being beyond ready. Rutger McGroarty, he's talking about. Well, if they keep trading players like Lars Eller, I think we're going to see Rutger McGroarty sooner rather than later. Perhaps a Vasily Ponomarev as well, the top prospect the Penguins got from Carolina in the Jake Gensel deal last year. I was amiss in not mentioning him a couple of shows ago when someone brought up who could help down on the farm. It's not a lot of guys, and as you see with Sam Poulin, I just don't think he's going to be an NHL contributor. So at least they gave him a look tonight, but the kid seems at least a step slow, if not a couple of steps slow, to truly contribute at the NHL level. He's not an overly skillful player, so maybe play below the goal line, use that big body, but in so many ways, the NHL is a game of speed these days, and you really are going to have a hard time carving out a career by just being the down low guy. It's really tough to do that unless you have a lot of support on your line. Gary Anderson says what I think we're all pretty much thinking. They're just a bad hockey team. I think they're a mediocre hockey team. I don't know if I'd call them bad because they have beaten the bad teams and they've lost to the good teams. Excuse me, a little dusty down here. Dry air in the winter time, and winter is quickly approaching. Anyway, back to Gary's point. They lose to Detroit, but actually Detroit has a better points percentage than them. So that has been the theme all season long. If you're sub 500 or close to it, the Penguins are probably going to play a decent game against you and most likely beat you. If you are above 500, the Penguins are going to lose to you, with the exception of the Washington Capitals, who, to be honest, I'm not quite sure how good the Capitals are. I know they're off to a nice start, but I guess they have the burden of proof as far as I'm concerned. Christopher Weir talking about McGroarty 2 points in 9 AHL games. Yeah, that's part of the reason why they sent McGroarty down, because he wasn't getting to those areas you need to score points in the NHL preseason, let alone AHL games that are real. So I'm okay with him marinating down there. Could work on some things, could work on just getting comfortable at the pro level. I know we talk about beyond ready, but this is still a guy who's looking forward to his first full pro season, and he just has not put in the body of work where you could say, oh, he'll definitely contribute in the NHL if you go ahead and bring him up. Here's a question about Kyle Dubas. Let me back out with my big head so you can read the whole thing without me getting behind the graphic. Do you trust the Dubas player evaluation enough for either a rebuild or a retool? Well, you almost have to at this point, because that's what he was hired to do. I know that he has paid lip service to keeping the Penguins competitive, but overall, his job is to bridge the gap to the next good Penguins team, and he has said that a few times. He's got as many misses, or he has as many misses as he's had. So Zane does not believe he is capable of either a rebuild or a retool. He hasn't filled a single hole. Yeah, we're still waiting for, I guess, the big success story, right? We've had some minor successes. Lars Eller, certainly one of them. I think Anthony Beauvillier is going to end up being a canny signing from this offseason, too. He's already, I think, matched his goal total from last year, which he split between the Islanders and the Canucks. So that idea was to have him boost his value, move him for an asset. I think that could easily happen here. I just feel like we're still in the early stages of it, though. So that's the genius, and that's the thing that I always laugh about when GMs are talking about, well, let's just be patient here and let's tear this thing down. And to Dubas's credit, he hasn't torn it down. He has talked about trying to thread that needle. I'm not sure if it's possible, but he hasn't done the thing like a Steve Yzerman where they say, just be patient, because isn't that convenient for a GM to say, just be patient, give me more time on the job so I can continue to have the gig and collect the paycheck. I'm not saying guys are thinking about that, but it's human nature, right? And when you do engage in a rebuild, you're essentially buying yourself 3 or 4 years at least, or you think you are, before you can really be judged on your results. And in a lot of ways, Dubas hasn't even really started the rebuild. And once we see a major player move, not a Lars Eller, I guess Jake Gensel last year. So suppose you could say, all right, it's been, 6-7 months since the rebuild has started, and it hasn't really been in earnest as well. It's been half-hearted. So that's why it's tough to evaluate. It's difficult to even figure out what the stakes are this season, right? Because if the intent was never to contend, then why am I getting worked up about a 3-2 overtime loss to Detroit in November? If the decision was to try to make something of this season and convince Sidney Crosby to sign that 3-year contract extension, which took him all the way into September to pull the trigger on, I remind you. So maybe Sid was wondering if he was in for something like this, and maybe he was having some second thoughts earlier in the season when he wasn't playing quite so well, and I called him out a couple of times for looking very uninspired. So there's a lot going on right now, I suppose, is what I should say. And that makes it a very difficult evaluation when we're trying to gauge success for this team, because I'm seeing a lot of folks online already saying, oh, good, they didn't get the extra point. That makes it more likely they finish in the lottery and they get a higher draft pick. Maybe we should be thinking like that. I have a hard time doing that in November personally. Get back to me in January and February before we start going there, because I don't like to waste entire seasons, especially when you still have some legendary players on the roster. And I think mentally I had accepted, at least in some form or fashion, that it was going to be a trying time and we were going to see a downturn and this was going to be difficult. It was going to be painful. But until you watch some of these players who've done so many great things for the Penguins suffer through losses, and in a lot of cases it's due to their own degradation in skill and ability to play the NHL game. Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Carlson to a smaller degree, they're not quite what they were at their peaks. And so the fact they wanted to stay together also precludes really tearing it down and really making it a big full-fledged rebuild. But at the same time, you look at the Detroit Red Wings, and I guess they were in a similar situation. They were trying to hang on. They kept trying to make the playoffs. They got to, 25 straight seasons. I forget if that was an NHL record or it wasn't. I know the Blues were up there as far as consecutive playoff qualifications in their teams from the late 80s, early 90s, or through the 90s, early 2000s. Not sure if the Wings ever got that record, but it was, in the end, a hollow victory to continue to stretch out that playoff streak, because they're still trying to dig out from that hole. And that could be where the Penguins end up either way. We just don't know at this point. But the fact is that when you do tear it down and when you do go for the full rebuild, there's no guarantee there. You could end up at the top of the draft when a Shane Wright is your number one pick, or a Niall Yakupov, or your player evaluators, your prospect evaluators make the wrong call and you pick the wrong guy at the top of the draft too. That could happen as well. It hasn't happened very much to the Penguins when they've been at the top. Fortunately for them, they've been no-brainer decisions, essentially. For instance, it's going to be Malkin or Ovechkin if they had the one pick in 2004. I think either way would have been just fine. And of course, 05, they finished at the top, and Sid was obviously going to be a generational talent. He was about as much of a slam dunk as any ever. And even the Jordan Stahl pickup, what a productive player he was for the Penguins, and Marc-Andre Fleury too. That was probably more of a long shot at the top of the draft. But the Penguins have gotten the job done when they've had top picks, going back to Mario Lemieux, of course. So all that is to say that there's no guarantee that continues. We're talking about a totally different management team, and even if it was the same management team, there's no guarantee that sort of thing continues. So I think you'd always prefer to maybe keep some sort of a bedrock of talent on the team as you try to restructure. Maybe not always, but in most cases, just because it is challenging to not only compile the talent, but as the Red Wings are seeing too, getting that talent to play together, to play with determination, to play quote unquote the right way, and to figure out how to win at the NHL level. None of that stuff is a guarantee. We were so spoiled here in Pittsburgh when Crosby and Malkin and Stahl and that gang and Fleury were finding ways to shoot right to the top of the standings after just 1 year, basically, that they were all together. They made the playoffs their first year they were all together. So that doesn't happen very often. It's basically them and the Blackhawks who had those like meteoric rises early on with the young core of talent. So I guess is what I'm saying is I'm not that eager to rush into the rebuild stage, and I get why Kyle Dubas might not be. But the big question, as Zane alluded to, is does Dubas have the chops, the player evaluation chops? Does he have the ability to make these right moves? Because I was arguing with a commenter on our previous show about the fact that Dubas did adjust in Toronto, and he tried throwing more defense at it. He tried throwing more grit and Stanley Cup rings at it. Still didn't work for the Leafs. Maybe it's more on the core than it is on the supporting players. But in a lot of ways, Dubas still has a lot to prove, even though he does have that wunderkind reputation. Maybe not quite as young, so I don't know if wunderkind is the right term, but he still has that, I suppose, exciting reputation, that sexy reputation as a guy who's going to be able to transform your franchise, or he has that winning patina around him. But in the end, he did get gifted quite a collection of talent in Toronto. And here in Pittsburgh, this is his real first job, as far as I'm concerned, because this is going to take some doing to get to the other side, and for him to still have his job when the Penguins do get to the other side. Thank you so much for joining me on the Rapid Reaction Show. The Pens come back. They show some determination. And Brian Rust injected some energy with a goal. That was great to see. And Brian Rust remains a leader. I'm wondering, how long is he for the Penguins as well? Because if they can get him to waive his no move, or I forget if it is a full no move or he has a list that he can submit. I'll have to look that up at some point. But you would think that Brian Rust would be a valuable piece as well. When someone like Rust is traded, then I would say the rebuild is fully on. Jamie says hello. Good to see you again, Jamie, and happy to be back with you. Christopher Weir's got some mistakes for us. And yeah, 65 Karlsson, probably chief among them. It just hasn't been a fit. Maybe we should have known it wasn't going to be a fit when Karlsson had to share the puck with some fellow stars. He really hasn't had to do that. There was some talent around him in San Jose, and they made a run to the conference final in 2019 before the Blues knocked him out. But for the most part, Karlsson's been the star on the teams he's been on, and I think that is maybe the most to blame for his lack of ability to adjust and to be a net positive for the Penguins, especially this year. It just seems like he's struggled immensely without the puck, definitely. Riley Smith, yep, guilty on that one. Tristan Jarry, maybe the worst move is Tristan Jarry. We're going to see him again. I bet he'll play at Columbus. The Penguins held him out of this game. I feel like if you're going to play Jarry, just throw him in there. I don't even know what they're doing, trying to protect his psyche. It's like the guy's 30 years old. Let's go. Nieto, yes. I think Acciari is actually, I think we're seeing more of what he should be and is this year, just because he's not playing center as much. So I'm not going to put Acciari in the mistake category here. Graves, big mistake. Grzelcyk looks like a mistake. I like Kevin Hayes, so I'll put him on a positive side. Ludwig on waivers, I don't know. John Ludwig, the guy never did anything for me. So I disagree with a few of those, Christopher, but overall, I'd say, yeah, it's been a net negative for Kyle Dubas if we're talking about player evaluations, player acquisitions. So I think everyone's right to be skeptical. And, well, he's not going to get fired anytime soon, so we're just going to have to sit here and wait. And I know that's not a good thing, not a good feeling, and it might not be a good thing in the long term, but that's just where we're at right now. So, again, that's what makes it difficult to really give it a big picture look, because I love to look at the big picture. I like to zoom out, but as of right now, I think I'm still forced to just narrow in on some of these happenings during these games, and I guess analyzing some of these trades that I think are coming down the pike. Lars Eller, mid-return for him, but at this point, he's pretty much a mid-player. Yes, a nice start to the season productivity-wise, but if you're talking about a good team, I don't think he should be playing much above fourth-line minutes, maybe a little bit of third-line minutes for Eller, and the guy can kill penalties. He's a defensive conscience. So I'm not saying he's not valuable, but he's in his mid-30s, expiring contract, and in a lot of ways, I think the Penguins got what they could for him there. The question is, how much further do they go in terms of moving players? Like I mentioned, Elliot Friedman reporting today that he's hearing around the league that Kyle Dubas is trying to take some quote-unquote home run swings, and he still wants to make big splashes, not necessarily just adding assets and futures. So at least that's interesting, right? That's something to look forward to. It's some action, something more than just going through the minutia of these games, which increasingly are getting more depressing. The deeper we get into the season, the more we realize this might just be the Penguins' level. And it's not even going to be as close as it was the last 2 years when we get down to the end and the Pens are trying to push for the playoffs. The Penguins now 6-9-3, and my nightly check of the standings is not going to be too kind. I think the Penguins were ahead of just a couple of teams in the Eastern Conference coming into the night, and they have played 18 games, more than anybody in the East except for New Jersey. They're 1 point up on Philadelphia, 3 up on the Jackets, who they will see on Friday in a couple of days, and 3 up on the Canadiens. So the Penguins, fourth from the bottom in the East, and they're ahead of the Blackhawks, the Predators, who continue to struggle, the Sharks, and the Ducks out west. So definitely lottery position right now for the Pens, and points percentage, they're even lower than that. So you could probably put them below the Flyers, below the Blues, maybe even below the Sharks and the Blackhawks, actually. Now that I do the math quickly in my head, they're right on level with those teams, all of them trying to build it back up, and in some cases still very much in the midst of a tear-it-down rebuild. Any more comments? I'm throwing out the last request for that as we're coming toward the end of the show. I don't like to go longer than a half an hour. Wouldn't be very rapid, would it? That's the new name of the show. I'm calling it the Rapid Reaction because I get you right after the final buzzer. Dan Kingerski often files his post-game story and a post-game video as well from the arenas where the Penguins are playing. So take a look for that one, or keep a lookout for that one, and the rest of his coverage from on site. Also, a tip of the cap, tap of the stick to Shelly Anderson for her practice reports too. It's all there at PittsburghHockeyNow.com. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. You can like on Facebook. You can also give us stars on Facebook. I'm still not quite sure how that process works, but according to what I'm reading here, stars help Pittsburgh Hockey Now maintain the most and the best hockey content. Christopher Weir says Achari himself isn't a mistake. Okay, but that player at 2.2 is, that I can understand. That seemed like a luxury, even with the cap going up. The cap's not up quite yet, though. So I can hear that. I do think Achari is a productive player, but much like Lars Eller, I think he's much more useful on a winning team. And so that's where I'll settle on that one. So I would say Kyle Dubas probably batting around 250, 300. That'll get you to the Hall of Fame in baseball, but not so much as an NHL general manager, will it? Anything else stick out to you from that game? I felt the Penguins actually leaned on the Red Wings in the third period. I was expecting the Pens to look a lot better against the Wings than they did against the Stars. I mean, duh, you might say. The Wings are much worse than the Dallas Stars, but the Penguins are the NHL's litmus test this year. If you are aspiring to be good, you better beat them. And if you're trying to get into the lottery, or if you are a bad team, you're probably going to lose to them. And or at least the Penguins are going to look better against you. It might be close in the end, but they might be able to edge you out. In this case, the Penguins just get the 1 point from Detroit. Uncle Deeb's faithful commenter here. He says, I want to have faith in Dubas, but right now he's got me a little confused. I don't know if he's confused, we're confused, because it does seem like that to me as well, like trying to do two things at once. And usually in life, when you try to do that, you don't accomplish either of those things that you're trying to do at once. We're not meant to be multitaskers, and I think NHL GMs shouldn't necessarily be multitaskers either. They're just kind of slowly chipping away at this rebuilding process or a retooling process. It's definitely more of a retool so far than a rebuild, and it's going to be delicate, and it's going to be challenging. I'm not sure they're going to get there, and nights like tonight, I think just sum it up, right? It's kind of down the middle. What do you make of a game like that? You lose in overtime, it's 3-on-3, whatever, but you need points if you're trying to make this season interesting, but also maybe you don't need points. Maybe you want to fall down in the standings. So there's just mixed emotions, mixed feelings, ambivalence in general. Not so much the kick in the groin that the loss to the Stars was on Monday. That's very clear. When something like that happens, we all know how to feel and we all can react. Tonight's game, definitely more of a challenge to draw something meaningful out of it. And for me, it's just more about this team just right down the middle. And in this case, well, they're lower than the middle right now. And maybe fortunately for them, they've played a decent amount of teams below them in the standings. That's not going to continue the rest of the way either. So you have to figure if their level remains the same, they're just going to stay here or maybe even drop a little bit more. I like this comment from Jennifer. She says, yawn. Okay, I'm tired too, so maybe I might call it a night. Let's do the out-of-town scores. See what's up there. Toronto beats Washington 4-3 in overtime. Carolina and Utah 1-1 late in the second. My Utah hockey club is struggling lately. Come on, let's get a win here. You fighting Utahns, whatever we want to call them at the moment. And LA and Colorado also on TNT, like our game, 1-1 in the first period. Speaking of TNT, anybody else have some weird audio effects going on? It felt like at times the audio was ahead of the action. Then they would make a cut to a different camera, and I would see something from like 2 seconds ahead of where I just was. It was just, I was watching on my laptop. I was streaming it, so maybe over the air or on cable, whatever you want to call it. If you were watching on a real TV, maybe your experience was different, but that was just a weird game to watch in that regard. It was very disconcerting. I had a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. I was thought I was having a stroke for a moment there. So I did see a few people on Twitter or X were saying the same thing. So it wasn't just me, but if that's the case, that's a rough look for Turner Sports. Usually rather solid. I like their broadcast typically, and still really enjoying their intermission reports. Here's a couple more comments. Hard to retool with Malkin and Letang still on this team. And the interesting things that we're hearing in the last couple of days regarding the fact that 87 is the only one who's not in play, according to the report from Taylor Haas, Penguins reporter from earlier this week. I don't know if Malkin's going to go anywhere. I don't think he wants to go anywhere. I think Letang could end up somewhere else. And I still am of the opinion that that they could get something for Chris Letang. I'm not sure how much at this stage. He's definitely diminished, I think, physically. And I think that has taken away from his aggressive mindset, too. He has so many games now where I forget what Letang even did, which I guess in the past, for a lot of Letang critics, that might be a good thing because he wasn't making the egregious error. But he used to do 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 things that would help the Penguins drive play and do some good things at the offensive end to transition the puck. And just feel like we're not seeing it a lot from Letang right now. And I brought this up, too, earlier, Chris, earlier this season, that Washington actually lucked into where they are in a lot of ways because Backstrom had to retire, like you say, and TJ Oshie is practically retired. He's got a neck or a back thing going on that I think might preclude him from ever playing in the NHL again. So that's a good point. You need some luck if you are going to move on from a very respected core. And one last thing from Uncle Deebs about the 3 goalie situation. I just don't think it's going to last very long. And the minute Jari shows anything resembling competence at the NHL level, I believe they will send Joel Blomqvist back down. Or Actually, maybe I shouldn't even say that. Perhaps they waive Nedeljkovic. I'm not sure he's done enough to merit a continued spot on this team, mainly because Blomqvist has shown, the Dallas game notwithstanding, that he's got a high ceiling, and that might be intriguing for the Penguins to have him be the number 2 guy. However, Jari has not shown that he's capable of even being on an NHL roster this season. He's been that bad. So I guess we can't put the cart too far ahead of the horse there. But a 3-goalie situation, never great in the NHL. You don't want to use that extra roster spot on a third goalie, a guy who's not even dressing on a given night. So not ideal. But I am glad that they are getting Blomqvist in the game and getting him some action so we can figure out, and they can figure out, what they might have in him and if he could accelerate his development timeline, perhaps. Aaron Cake says Karlsson was flying tonight. I think Karlsson's had some decent games lately, and as I tweeted this evening, when he has the puck, he's fine. It's when he hasn't had the puck that he's making these strange reads and leaving his teammates out to dry. Jody Shelley on the TNT broadcast was talking about Karlsson and saying maybe he just sees the game differently from the rest of his teammates. I don't disagree with that, but you could say the same thing about Sidney Crosby as well, and he's made it work over the years, and Karlsson's made it work over the years, no matter where he's been. But it's been without the puck that he has struggled mightily, and I think struggled is even an understatement there. It has been a dumpster fire with Karlsson when we're talking about his hockey IQ and his decision-making, and I did not expect that. I knew he wasn't good at defending, but I just thought it was because he wasn't good at defending. Literally, he didn't have the capability, but I think he does. I just think he doesn't quite care that much about the defensive end, and well, that's not the kind of attitude you want to have, is it? That's not something you want young players to be around, or any player to be around. So that part of the whole Erik Karlsson experience has left me quite disappointed, and I had a much higher opinion of him before he joined the Penguins. So that part of it is certainly a downer. We're past the half-hour mark, so I'm going to say good night. I'm not going to be able to be with you for this weekend's games against Columbus or San Jose, so I'll catch you next week, actually. Been my pleasure to be with you for a couple of shows this week. Sorry we couldn't bring home a victory for you, but at least tonight they got a point, I guess. 3-2. The Red Wings win in overtime. And another reminder to like and subscribe on YouTube, now rebranded as the Pittsburgh Hockey Now YouTube channel. And we're on Facebook, also streaming these videos live on our page over there. For Dan Kingerski, Shelly Anderson, and everyone at Pittsburgh Hockey Now, I'm Matt Gajtka saying good night, God bless, and I'll talk to you next time for another Penguins Rapid Reaction show.